Welcome back to our Humans of Nature podcast series. I'm your host, Vasundhara,
And I'm Ritambhara.
and today we have a special honorary guest with us today who's an expert in the field of whale shark conservation. Please join me in welcoming Ariana Agustines. She's a marine conservationist and National Geographic Explorer, and her passion lies in crafting sustainable strategies for safeguarding sharks, rays, and whale sharks. And she leads the Palawan Whale Shark Project in the Philippines, and she also manages the Philippines National Acoustic Telemetry Network for sharks and rays. And her mission basically revolves around nurturing responsible marine practices and bridging communities with wildlife and advocating for their harmonious coexistence. So we just mentioned a few things that you do. So for our listeners who may not be familiar with your background, do you have anything else you would like to add?
No, that's basically it. Professionally, I am a shark conservationist, working in the island of Palawan, Philippines, with the organization LAMAVE, the Large Marine Vertebrates Research Institute Philippines, a Filipino nonprofit organization, basically working on marine conservation efforts on marine megafauna throughout the wider Philippine region.
All right, thank you so much for that introduction. So we can now move in on our first question.
So, can you share with us the journey that led you to become a deeply involved in marine conservation, particularly focusing on sharks?
Yeah, so I grew up in the Philippines, right? It's an archipelagic country. And so I was very close to the ocean from a young age. I started scuba diving when I was little, and just being exposed to the underwater world um, really kind of drew me in, the diversity of marine life, the different colors. And it was just, yeah, I think it was that exposure, so kind of taking that path through my academics, through high school and university. And then, yeah, as more issues, more like conservation related issues started to arise. With I think it was the instance of like a coral bleaching event that happened in the Philippines. I was aware of. I was like, oh, okay, I want to go back home and kind of help support marine conservation issues back home. What is one way that I can help or I can be involved? And yeah, it was through sort of going with Lamave right off the bat. They were focusing on, large marine vertebrates. And the Palawan project was actually the first project that um, I managed, and that was right off with the biggest shark in the world, the biggest fish in the world, the whale shark. So yeah.
Thank you for that. It's really amazing to see that you were exposed to the marine life as you were a kid, and then growing up, you decided to pursue that as well. It's great to see.
Also, as a National Geographic Explorer, you worked on various projects. So could you tell us particularly impactful or memorable moment from your fieldwork?
Yeah, so I think one of the most memorable ones was on an expedition in Hawaii, conducting baited remote underwater video surveys in off of the Hawaii Islands. And that really was an opportunity to work with a team from different backgrounds. We had never met prior to the expedition. It was just all online communication, coordination, pitching of the project proposal, setting everything up. And when we've all arrived, it seemed very seamless, like everyone's role in the project. And, when we did our first deployment, the BRUVs basically is a technique wherein we try to observe the different species using underwater camera with a bait attached to it. And this was to try to quantify the diversity of elasmobranchs in and around the Hawaii Islands, their presence there. Um, and yeah, when we first deployed our BRAVs in Lanai, it was really exciting that when we retrieved it, we actually had our first shark within the view frame. And yeah, I think that was quite memorable because we were able to share that with the team on board the whole ship, as well as, the dive operation that we were working with. And it was like a great start to the expedition. And yeah, just kind of seeing like all of the work, all of the teamwork coming together, with yeah, an exciting review of the footage. Oh, what's going to come up? Are you going to see anything? And yeah, you see a shark in the view frame. You're able to identify it. Yeah, it's quite rewarding.
All right, thank you. That's amazing to hear. I have a question for that. What were like some of the information that you gleaned from this project that you would like to share? Like, what were some of the takeaways?
Yeah, so in terms of like it was a 2-week expedition, and we deployed several bruvs around different islands of the Hawaii Islands, and we sampled shallow stations, and like deeper off reefs, and the majority or most of the shark sightings or the shark observations were actually in the deeper deployments, which were 40 meters and below. That's not to say, right, that the shallower areas around the Hawaii Islands don't have any shark presence, right? It's all very dependent on, the seasonality, the target species, like the specific areas, the time of year. But yeah, just to kind of get an understanding that, the deeper areas are also just as or equally as important, right, in deserving proper protection, proper management plans, because shark species and other like elasmobranch species are also found and present in those waters. Um, and from a more teamwork and collaborative effort, um, it was quite helpful to know that within a team working and living with each other, for 2 weeks in a vessel, there needs to be like proper communication, and support system, right? Even if you are, the educator, the formal educator, or the project leader, you're not isolated in those roles. That you kind of take on different roles according to what your teammates need at that time, and that was really present, and that was really visible, throughout the expedition, where we did provide support for each other at different times, giving each other what we needed, to help support, the work that we're doing, both, physically, and also like the emotional and mental support as well.
Thank you so much for expanding on that. And you mentioned like a really great point how people on land would want to enforce laws to help keep sharks away from the shallow end, which is where they usually are. But you guys are putting emphasis on how it's also just as important to know what's going on in the deep end, just as much as how it's important what's going on in the shallow end.
So, you also mentioned using cameras and like advanced technologies like satellite telemetry. So, how do these technologies contribute to your research and conservation efforts?
Yeah, so the first part really of trying to protect a species, right, is understanding, first of all, their presence in a given area, the population size, their population demographics, and also like the habitat use, how they use the area, and where else they go. So, photo identification or these bruvs, underwater cameras, record initially, right, the presence of different species, and sort of their relative abundance in those areas, right? To see if there is, you know, uh, how many different species are there, if it's important for what types of species, because different species require or may require different protective measures, and so kind of like getting a glimpse, right, of what that habitat offers, and kind of what that habitat contains is the primary really like baseline understanding. And then once you kind of know like what the species are there through, right, documented and recorded observations through, remote underwater video systems or through photo identification, which is another technique that, photographs different animals with unique uh, patternings, that act as tags, but in a non-invasive way, um, can help you build sort of like an idea of the population that's residing in that area or that passes by in that area. And then satellite telemetry can then complement this by, seeing, okay, how do the animals, it's satellite telemetry is basically like a tag. It is a tag that you attach on the animal that records, their movement, depending on, what sensors are attached to it, their depth profile. So how do they use, that area that they're swimming in. And so, let's say, in a particular time of year, they utilize one area more often than the other, then this could inform researchers this is a critical habitat for this species at this given time of year. So therefore, whatever activities that are occurring in that area might need to be a bit more managed and regulated, right? Because there might be higher conflict or higher interaction with that species. So satellite telemetry can tell us, how the species is using the area, where they're moving to. A lot of large migratory animals, you know, they move around not just within national jurisdictions and boundaries, but also international waters, right? So kind of identifying any key migratory corridors as well is important in, constructing maybe transboundary protection or specific areas of protection based off of their movement patterns.
Yeah, thank you for that. I feel like it's a great tool to use, especially in conservation efforts. So then you can see like the documented videos of the sharks or like the animal that you've tagged. And if the animal is like a migratory animal, it's easy to see which direction they move when and how. Yeah, it's a great tool to use.
And you also emphasize the importance of local stakeholders. Like for you, they could be tour operators or small scale fisheries. And how would you approach building these collaborations and what challenges do you commonly face?
Yeah, so I mean, involving the local stakeholders is very, very important in conservation. I think it's the underlying really, there would be no conservation advancements without the involvement and without the cooperation with the local stakeholders, right? And so yeah, it's more about initially, understanding their what their current situation is, getting to know them, establishing a relationship, um, establishing trust, so that they're able to share their story, and share their point of view that's not, coming from a maybe biased way, or that's not coming from a guarded way, right? So if of course it's different when you first meet someone, right? The way they present themselves, the way that the things that they share, it will be very, very different from when you kind of already know that person. There's more information that they're willing to share, right? You've established sort of a deeper relationship with them, so there's other things you may acquire, or that you might infer, or that you might understand based off of their context. So yeah, kind of like building that relationship, and understanding their point of view is important, and sort of, yeah, making sure as well that there is trust in both ways, right? That you're not just receiving information about them from them, but also like how are you able provide support to them, right? In a way that they need, and that they can benefit from. And yeah, one of the challenges working with different stakeholders is sort of the balancing of the needs. And so, right, each different stakeholder, as researchers as well as one stakeholder, we have different objectives for, let's say a conservation of a species or protection of a place, right? Versus, the tourism industry, which might come at it from more of a business perspective, for example, versus, the perspective of fisheries, right? Or small scale fishers, where it's centered around more on like a livelihood, like a direct livelihood. And so balancing those different needs is quite challenging, and kind of creating, like a dialogue where you can come up with a compromise. You can address certain issues that seem to be the priority, right? And be a little bit flexible on some needs that may not be higher on the priority for, the management plan, for example.
Exactly. Thank you so much for sharing that, because the involvement of the locals is really what amplifies and gets your information through to whatever target audience you wanted to reach. And what we like learned over time talking to so many biologists and researchers is that conservation is more about like the connection within like people and themselves, because that's what ultimately gets productive conservation in place and leads to a better ecosystem wherever they are.
Yes, definitely. I mean, it's always like, I think more powerful when the local community have agency, and have, you know, the the belief that they're able to, you know, make whatever changes is necessary to protect their environment, right? If it's other people that are coming in and kind of like setting the standard, the norm, yes, that's great. That might work for a while, but if the community, the people who live there, the people who directly like affect and have the biggest impact on, the environment, if they're not 100% involved, or if they are 100% involved, that's where you can see, the biggest like differences, whether that's in a positive way or in a negative way.
Yeah, that was very well said. And you mentioned earlier the Philippines Whale Shark Research and Conservation Project, which you manage. So, can you share some of the key findings and their implications for conservation?
Yeah, so the Philippines has several whale shark aggregation sites, and Lamave also works in several of those project sites. So we have Donsol up in Luzon. We have Leyte in southern Leyte in the Visayas. We have Palawan in the west part of the Philippines. And then the all year round provision site in Oslob in central Visayas. So, um, you know, understanding in each of those project sites, our goal is really to kind of understand the population of whale sharks in the area, to see if there's any connectivity within, the Philippine population, and internationally, and to identify really the major threats for those um, uh, aggregations, right? Because it might be different for each different site. Um, and overall, each site is quite different, but globally, the whale shark population in the Philippines, or aggregation site in the Philippines, um, is quite unique in that it, so far, based off of photo identification and identified individuals, it's the second largest aggregation of whale sharks globally, just second after Mexico, I believe. And several um, there are several phases, if you will, of whale sharks found here, right? We have, there's presence of mature individuals in Donsol. We've recorded some mature males and females. There's also, juveniles, which are, smaller individuals, not yet mature, not yet able to sexually reproduce. And also there have been recordings of neonates, or newly born whale sharks. All these different life stages of whale sharks, right, is quite revealing as to the importance that the Philippines plays in, the population, the global population of whale sharks as a whole, being an endangered species. Whale sharks are found globally throughout the world, in coastal areas, in tropical waters, but not all of those aggregations host or have documented those like three different life stages. Usually it's an aggregation of juveniles, predominantly males, right? But here in the Philippines, we do have females, mature and immature, so all of these kind of points to the fact that the Philippines could be important place for the whale sharks throughout its entire life stage, right? From when if there's neonates present, perhaps there's an area close by, right, where there's a breeding area or a nursery area. And the fact that there's mature individuals might suggest, that there are individuals, or there is a population um, that is sexually mature and possibly breeding close by. And so yeah, sort of the conservation implications of that, is quite large. As yeah, whale sharks have been, like hunted historically for their fins and for their meat, and the populations have declined drastically. So having that recovery potential, being in the Philippines, is quite yeah, impactful.
Yeah, it's great to see such a big organization in the Philippines because then you know that more communities are involved in the conservation of these animals. And it's nice to see local communities being aware of this ongoing issue and helping to recover the potential population again.
And also going back, you mentioned the work that goes on between you and your team and the locals, but sustainable coexistence between communities and marine wildlife is also a central theme in your work. So, how would you balance the needs of both people and the environment while pursuing your goals?
That's a very good question. And yeah, very, very important as well. Having the local community also be aware, also wanting to be involved in the conservation, the protection of their environment, is so important. I cannot stress that enough. And so, us as an organization, our role is to provide that support, right? To provide that link where we can sort of help support the communities, and help them either through awareness, through education, through capacity or trainings, be able to have the I wouldn't want to say capacity, but have sort of the knowledge, the tools, right, to have the confidence to be able to um, manage and protect their environment. So yeah, I think like on a personal level, like a goal, if one of my goals, right, is for the conservation of the marine environment, and one avenue and one method to achieve that is through working with the local community, or not just through research and and data collection, right, but more as well on the indirect sides, if you will, more on the people aspect, which I kind of started to realize a bit later on, working more and more in this field. Yes, the data is important to collect, right? It provides the basis, and it provides sort of like the framework for the creation of certain policies, of certain guidelines, right, that have a direct impact on the conservation of the species in an area. But it's also, I've realized that the people part is also very, very important. Making those connections with people, being able to provide them with, the data, right? So we're presenting to them with the data that we've collected as a research organization, and helping them uh, sort of see like how this data supports the conservation and protection of an area or a species. Um, and yeah, that would kind of be the triad, the merging of those different components that I feel that are central to my goal.
Thank you. I really like the way you explained that. And could you, like, if you have a specific example of the ways that you recently incorporated the locals, and what, like, a day in the life it will look like for them in helping with your work?
Yeah. So, for example, like in the Palawan Whale Shark Project, there are different stakeholders involved. There's the tourism sector, there's the fishery sector, there's the government sector, and with the tourism, for example, it's still quite small. It's a small industry here that engage in whale shark tourism. Um, and recently, there's been a new addition, a new tour operator that had been involved in the whale shark tourism. And a lot of the crew, a lot of the staff, they were fishers or they had other employment, so they were very new to, the tourism industry. And one of the ways that we could help support them is through training in, like proper guidelines and how to properly interact with the whale shark, because the whale shark tourism here in Palawan is becoming more and more popular. In order to prevent any negative impacts to the species, the way that the tourism interacts and conducts their operation with the whale sharks is quite important. So, training the operations in or not training, but rather presenting to them, what the local ordinance, the local laws, the proper code of conduct is, not just for the protection of the species, but also for the an increased value to the guests, right? Because as well, they're also part wanting to be a sustainable operation, but they are also still a business, right? And the more value that they can provide, the higher guest experience, right, that they can provide for their guests, the better it will be for the business. And that's we also want that. We want it to be a win-win situation where, yes, they are still able to benefit and they're still able to profit from their business, but also do it in a sustainable way that doesn't or that has the most minimal impact to the target species. So, right, providing a way where they can have an educational component in their tours by, sharing with them the knowledge and the research that we're doing, right, as an added value to their tour experience. And, but also at the same time, ensuring that their operations, that the way that they conduct their tours are in a sustainable way and that their team and that their crew are able to provide that, provide the highest quality experience and support to the guests in their operations.
All right, thank you. That's amazing to hear how everyone basically is in a win-win situation here.
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier that whale sharks are an endangered species. So what are some of the most pressing threats that these species face in Southeast Asia, and what strategies are you employing to address these challenges?
Yeah, so I think the whale sharks have become endangered over the past few years, mainly due to targeted fisheries. Um, So in the 90s and the 80s and 90s, whale sharks were heavily targeted for their fins, in the shark fin trade as well as for meat, through local consumption, at least in a Philippine context. And so that has, their because as a shark, species, they have, you know, yeah, declined in population. And so one of the that was one of the major threats and still continues up to today. There are still some you know bycatch of sharks and even targeted fishing of whale sharks. For the most part, globally, I would say a lot of countries have protected the whale sharks, given that it is under the CITES listed species. And so there's a proper like protocol for the trade of these species. And in the Philippines, they are nationally protected, so it's illegal to hunt, to kill them. But of course, right, if not targeted, there's still bycatch that occurs wherein, through fishery practices, they still get entangled, they still, face fatalities through that. And so I think that's still quite a threat. But now I think it has also diverted to tourism. You know, the whale shark is the most watched shark in the world, with over, I think, 30 countries employing various strategies for viewing them, for scuba diving to snorkeling. And so the impacts of tourism, whether that's, you know, mass tourism, or you know, different operations that engage in tourism with whale sharks, is one threat, um, and like to be able to manage the operations, right? As I mentioned earlier, to be able to conduct the tourism in a sustainable way, um, is important, because different populations of whale sharks globally, right, they have different dynamics. Some of them, you know, stay, come or go back to that area year round, seasonally. Some of them use it for foraging areas, right? And all of these are quite important in the future development of the individual, of the population as a whole. And you know, tourism, if there's a constant presence, if there's like yeah, the impacts can be from like crowding, overcrowding, right? Where, you know, the guests and the boats just kind of overcrowd the area, and the whale sharks are unable to perform, um, you know, their natural function, why they're in that area for, right? If their behavior is being disturbed, that has an impact on their health, that has an impact on, you know, their movement, right? And so, yeah, I think unsustainable tourism now is one of the biggest threats to whale sharks globally.
Yeah, conducting tourism in a sustainable way sounds like a bit of a challenge because everything is in black and white, right? So you have to find a way to um have tourists see these animals, but then not making them feel like they're captivated in a certain place or not being able to feel free in a way, I guess.
Yeah, so for our next question, for you looking into the future, what are your like hopes and aspirations for the conservation of marine megafauna in your region, and how do you see your work evolving to contribute to whatever goals you want to pursue?
Yeah, so I think that's a quite like self-reflective question indeed. And I think, you know, for the Philippines and for Asia, like my hope is really for the 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 communities, the nations, to be able to like see the value of sharks in particular, right? See the value of sharks and be able to benefit in a positive way from them. Where I understand the difficulties and the challenges that a lot of people, right, in Southeast Asia, they engage in, you know, shark fisheries for various reasons, for, you know, still to supply, you know, the shark fin trade, for, you know, utilizing the oil, you know, and the communities or the people involved might not necessarily want to do that job, might want to do that profession, but you know, maybe that is their source of income, and it's quite difficult to really kind of take that from them, right? Just for the conservation of the species. If there was like any other way, if there was I wouldn't even say like to stop altogether, but maybe manage it better, right? So that there is still the potential for sharks as a whole to recover, where they're not being, you know, um, threatened to a level of the brink of extinction, right? So yeah, I just hope that, you know, as a nation, and as a region, that we're able to sustainably manage, you know, sharks in our area, so that people can engage in a variety of, or utilize them in a variety of ways, right? For tourism, even for like local consumption, you know, for their livelihood, but in a way that it doesn't impact, or it doesn't, you know, push them towards, you know, severe population decline. Um, And for me, like personally, how I'd want to kind of like achieve that and how I'd want to contribute to, shark conservation, um, like in the Philippines and the wider region, is to one aspect is for like the education, for understanding, for connecting with the communities to kind of like see, you know, what the importance is of sharks in their lives, and um, how to be able to help and support, you know, the management and the utilization of sharks for them. Ultimately, I do want, a blanket protection on sharks, right? That there would be no killing at all. But I understand and I realize that that is not really the ideal, or that's not, a realistic expectation, either through, bycatch still. But if there's one way where I can kind of reduce the threat levels and kind of reduce the bycatch of sharks, or, reduce the targeted hunting through working with the communities who engage in that, and through kind of leveling up my own expertise and skills so that I'm in a better position to help support them, is kind of in the way that I want to go.
Yeah, thank you for that. We really believe that the work you're doing is going to help leverage whatever information you want everyone to know to help better sustain the populations of the species that you're researching towards. And also, would you have any organizations or volunteer programs for anyone locally where you're located, or maybe online, that would like to share, particularly for people who want to learn more about shark or megafauna conservation?
Yeah, so Lamave, we have a volunteer program for early career researchers, scientists to help, collect data in the field to help, upskill their skills. And so we have several projects that people who are interested to join, different times of the years and the different project sites, working with turtles, manta rays, whale sharks, um, and as well as for local Filipinos, we offer a scholarship program, which again is, offering scholarship to a placement, again, of their choice in the different project sites, working with either turtles, manta rays, or whale sharks for the time being, so that they both volunteers and the scholars are able to kind of like see and understand, you know, how conservation works with those species, and how nonprofits operate, and kind of like the challenges, the benefits, the methodologies used, in conservation of those target species. So yeah, Lamave, their volunteer program is available on the website at lamave.org.
All right, thank you so much for sharing that. We'll definitely also have that linked on our website. So whoever's interested can also go there and go directly to whatever they have to fill out to get into that.
So, we have reached the end of another episode of the Humans of Nature podcast. So, before we go, we want to express our deepest gratitude to Ariana for being part of this podcast. Our heartfelt appreciation goes out to you for joining us today and being an integral part of this remarkable journey. Your support and willingness to contribute help make a positive impact on the topic discussed today.
So thank you so much
Thank
for
you so much for
joining
joining us.
Thank you both, ladies. Have a wonderful evening. I really appreciate it as well.